Is this better? Okay. So, what Patrick had suggested is maybe we could do it in a wiki format. Since has anyone here ever been part of doing a document update? Yeah, for UDOT, it takes years, it seems like, because chapter one goes out, people do their thing, go back, red line strikeout, and it takes forever for it to get updated. So this thought was it could be updated almost on the fly, and it seemed like a great idea. So Danielle Derringer came to Central in, I think it was about 2011, in her rotation for project management, and the idea was that she would take the existing and rearrange it in this wiki format. So she spent a lot of time kind of rearranging. She had just been on rotation in Region 2 in design and kind of had an idea of what a good way for new designers to look at a document would be. And she rearranged it into the chapters of disciplines. So she took that, got it all set up, and then with rotations, after 6 months, she left. So Brian Allen took it, and he started. You know, one of the first things you have to do is go through the training of SharePoint, which it's not really user-friendly from an administrative standpoint. And he got all of the different administrative accesses set up and some of the search functions and some other functionality of it. Okay, Fred. So this is not a true wiki from the standpoint of if you go and make a change that it's immediate. Some of the wikis are not ours, but have just moderators where anyone can change it and then a moderator may change it back. This is where what happens is if someone comes in and they say, you know what, your super elevation is wrong in here as a description in the MOI, then that would come as an email to the lead for roadway design, and a decision would be made of whether or not that should be updated, and then it would be updated on the web. So each discipline lead decides whether or not they would modify their section based on comments once it's updated. Okay. So with that said, at least initially, the electronic version is not going to be the legal version. And there's a number of reasons for that. SharePoint has the ability to have a history of every single change that's made. So if we are using the roadway MOI and we do get to a court case, and let's use a very unreasonable scenario where every 10 minutes that document's changed electronically on the web, it's going to be really hard to go back and point to which one was the one that was being used for that design. So at least initially what we'll do is we'll have I call it a paper copy. It's not really a paper, it'd be a PDF or something that would be the legal document. And the online would be a courtesy copy where everyone can still make comments and it's still going to be searchable and it's likely going to be just as good as the paper document, but it will only be online as kind of a courtesy, so to speak. What we're thinking will likely happen is that if there's a critical update that everyone needs to know about, each discipline lead would decide whether or not that should be updated. So if that were the case, it might be updated more than twice a year. And right now, even twice a year may be more than we need because, like I said, it hasn't been updated for 4 years. So that's kind of going to be a decision that we make as we go. So what we will do to try and make it so that so that you can look at the electronic version and know how close it is we'll have a list of what the differences are between the electronic version and the published version. Okay. So what I'm going to go through, and I'm expecting this is going to put half of the people to sleep here, but this is kind of the organization of the existing document.
George, is that the other half of the people?
Exactly. So by the end of this, I'm sure everyone's out. So the way that it's set up right now is there's a general information, and under that general information, there's basic design standards and specs. Legislation, it talks about the federal legislation, state legislation, policies and procedures, agreements, goes through and it has everything that's basically with design. All of the legal requirements, talks about EPM, what the PM designer role is, and how you manage project delivery. Okay? So systems planning and programming is the next section. section. It talks specifically about how our projects are planned. It goes through the STIP. It goes through all of the planning parts, planning, environmental planning. Oddly enough, the way that it's organized, it talks about QCQA on a project. So it doesn't really fit in there, and there's some other things like that in all of these sections where they're just not quite where you'd think they'd be, okay? Environmental, it talks about documents, what environmental documents we have and which ones what projects they would be used for, how public involvement and what its importance is for PI, or for environmental, and then the environmental studies that we do. Project documentation, value engineering, talks about QCQA plan, and it does point to, I think, an outdated link for the QCQA plan. Talks about exceptions, deviations, and waivers, and what the process is for that and what each one means. Our electronic signature process. And with that said, I know at least internally to UDOT, and I don't know when and if consultants will have the same capability, but there is going, I think right now is available a signature from SharePoint. Does anyone in here have the internal signature now? Do you use it, Chris? Is it SharePoint? Yeah. Cosign, yeah. So, Chris, do you use it on like CAD on sheets and stuff? And does it work tons better? Okay. Yes. Right. So once you're logged in the network. So I think what will happen is, and as we get further along, and some people probably already have a utah.gov email if you're a consultant. I think that also gets you access if you get with our DTS folks. But one of the things that'll be really nice about that is if you've ever signed something like a PDF or whatever, and you go back, what's the very first thing that happens? It saves all the signatures, and it takes forever. And that's why I was asking Chris. So on those CAD sheets, it still does the same thing? Okay. But for the whole set? All right. And I think Ivan was saying that was supposed to be something that wouldn't happen, so hopefully that'll be taken care of too. I think with our third-party signature, that's never going to change that way. So commitments and documentation, the contract documents themselves, and advertising. All right, Fred? So we go in and it talks about our contract types: design, bid, build, design, build, and the things that go along with it, CMGC, and incentives on projects. Talks a little bit about, it says A plus B. I think that's P plus T now. Go ahead. Design criteria, controls, and standards is the next chapter. It talks about our controls on projects, the types of projects, preservation, rehabilitation, 3R guidelines and what needs to be done, standards and criteria, our safety spot improvement, maintenance spot improvement, blue books, enhancements, design process manual, special provisions, both project-specific and department, measurement of payment, engineer's estimate. That's a little bit outdated now. It talks about just the designer doing the engineer's estimate. It doesn't have anything about estimate support at central. Intersections, freeways, lane types, estimating, goes through all of these. The next section is safety elements. It talks about roadway safety, traffic barriers, attenuators, work zone traffic control, signing, delineation, illumination, traffic control signals, INTI, whatever that means. I think that's supposed to be the next line. Intelligent transportation systems. So, John, what are we missing in there? Oh, John's sleeping, sorry. Go back. I think you skipped one. Yeah, in fact, you know what I think it was the bike and ped facilities. Go to the next one, yeah. So it talks about bike facilities, concept environmental phase, bike and ped considerations. So these are all also really outdated because we're talking about this was 7 years ago and a lot has changed since then with respect to that, okay? Rest areas and waste stations, it talks specifically about each. So as we get to the end here, most of these are fairly short. On the structures, it talks generally about bridges and such, and then with the geotech, same thing. It's pretty brief on going into those.
And then what it does, it points to the other people's MOIs, right?
Not in the old one. So this is the organization of the old guidelines. And then hydraulics, the section is just the hydraulic consideration. Erosion and sediment control, basically talking just about general and erosion and sediment. And then grading and landscaping, that's the next chapter. It is contour grading, landscaping, vegetation, and its components. This is one of the longer sections other than road or the documentation section in the current one. And this is the right-of-way, it's access control and utilities. It's the right-of-way guidelines, all the special features, easements and permits, programming of funds. Talks a lot about acquisitions and appraisal and relocation, transactions, fencing, utilities. The railroad crossing talks about military land, reservations, and mining claims. The last part of this is the research and economic studies and utility pole locations. It goes into a little bit of the information for local government funding, the Class B and C funds, what the rules and procedures are, how those B and C funds are used and how they can be used, and what the eligibility requirements are for B and C roads. Materials, again, there's a little bit of overlap with geotech. Geotech's in there again. Talks about the earthwork, the subgrade, base course, soil type, pavement. Talks a lot about the region pavement engineer and what their function is and how they're going to go about doing the design. So now we're going to see if I can get in here and go to a little bit of what the new organization is, what the features are, and what our schedule is for completion. So let's see if I can, oops, there. I thought I did. So I'm going to go back here and show you how you get into this site. Right now, if you go to UDOT's webpage and you type in Design Guide MOI, you come to our page that has both the existing one, which is the current version down here, and then the actual wiki version here. And if you click on that, it will take you to this version. Now, I'm already logged in, so you have to have a login to get here. If you go and come here, it's going to bring up username and password. If you would like to come and look at this, it's very easy to get a username and password. You just have to get in contact probably with either Carrie Ann Noble or Jessica Andrews, and they'll be able to get you set up. Ultimately, what will happen is this will just be on the web, and anyone will have access to it and will be able to make comments. So my understanding is if you have a network login, then you automatically can get into interchange. So you have to have that utah.gov. Yes. Yep.
Yeah, it's not a specific login just for the wiki.
So this is what the new organization is. Over here on the left is the menu. Now it's almost specifically discipline-based. It's program development, project management, roadway design, environmental, utilities, right-of-way, hydraulics, materials, structures, geotech, traffic and safety, construction, maintenance, and appendices. And like I was saying, we don't have this completely updated, so some of the sections are where they need to be and some of them aren't. And I'm going to go into a couple of them where, like structures, right now, there really is almost no text for structures. They basically point to all of their items. So they've got this intro, and then if we go back, I'm going to go back a page. They've got Sorry about that. I know we've got I'm so bad with colors that I can't see where there it is. If you click on that, it's going to go to the Bridge Management Manual. So instead of having to update two documents at one time, I'll take this for a second. Instead of them having to update two documents at one time, in essence what they've done is they've said, look, our Bridge Management Manual of Instruction is what you need to look for, and they've got the link in there. That's going to make it substantially easier for everyone than instead of having to update a Word document every 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. This way, all of the disciplines will have their stuff updated by virtue of linking to their stuff. When it's updated, what we'll do is we'll have on this front page a notification that says, hey, Structures has updated this manual, and then designers who are going in will know that that's been done. Give me 1 second, I'm going to rearrange this. All right, Fred, sorry about that.
I'm lost. I am an excellent mic stand. I think I'm good at it. I want to continue to do it.
Okay, so the next part of this is coming down into, like I said, with structures. Now, it's just those few things. Some of the other ones still have text. Program development still has basically the same text it had before. And here's another thing that we have not updated. Some of the way that these chapters and subsections are set up are different, and those will become consistent so that they have the same consistency each way. When we first started this, SharePoint has the ability to be kind of like a Toys R Us website that looks really, really fancy. Well, we don't have that kind of resource, so this is clunky in some respects where you can see down here, these are not clickable. It tells you what's within the program development and what the sections are, but when you click on it, it comes down, and some of the pages are super long based on the way that they're set up, and some are not quite as long. So some of the things that have been updated, for instance, is the milestone processes. We now have MAP 21 in there. A lot of this stuff is just updated to be more current. But the reorganization didn't eliminate that was in the old one unless it was an outdated function that we use. So most of the text is very current, except some of the recommendations that were made from some of the people who have done the review. So then, unfortunately, you've got to go back to the top. You hit the show navigation. You can come back to this main menu, or you can go back to the main page. And so like I was saying earlier, when you had, say, structures or someone change something, there's an announcements right here, and so structures can come in and they can type in an announcement and say, hey, our bridge inspection manual's been updated, and then that way, if you're a designer, you know that that's been done. One of the things that Danielle and I think Brian also commented on is they felt like they were the last ones to know anything that was going on with changes, and they'd get to Plan in Hand or PS&E and find out that something changed and they didn't know it. So thought that that would be really helpful to have something like that. When you come into a page, and this is on any page, so if we pick right-of-way and then we go to one of the right-of-way may not be set up, we'll see if it is. Okay, survey. At the bottom of each page is the ability to do one of two things. You can either have a discussion, and a discussion does not have any action item for someone who is a discipline lead. This is just a discussion between anyone. It can be internal, it can be within UDOT consultants, or it could be worldwide for that matter, anyone that gets into this page. If you do a feedback will send an email to that discipline lead, and if a suggestion is made, then that discipline lead would have the action of whether or not to update the MOI. So that's where the wiki part comes in, making it more of a dynamic document than one that needs to be revisited, say, every 4 years or 6 years or whatever happens. So this is where that challenge comes in that I was talking about earlier, where in essence, if this were changed all the time, the legal version could become a nightmare of trying to point to it in a court case. So for now, this will be the courtesy copy, and there will be a hard copy that's available. The other kind of nice feature about this is that you can come in and search for certain items you may be looking for. So if you want to see something about design exceptions, You type in design exceptions, and it will bring up the instances of design exceptions within the document. So somewhere in managing project, there will be a design exception. So let's see if I can find that. So it will find all those instances, and then you can come down and look. So same thing, if you're looking for stopping sight distance. It must not be hyphenated. It's going to bring up all of the stopping sight. So this will be really nice from that perspective of being able to go in and find where certain items you may need to know specifics about design. Almost everything in here now is linking to the specifics that you need. The green book is in there, roadway safety elements, all of those. I think, John, do you know where Sean is on updating this? For safety, it's going to be the same thing where they're going to point to their safety manuals and the different safety features that are needed on a. Yeah, so John said that he's working with Becky and he and Sean to get these updated. So right now, I would say about half of them are updated and the other half are really close. And we're looking at publishing this at the beginning of the new year. So at that point, there will also be some, I guess what I would call administrative rules on when changes would be published and how they'll be published. Trying to think if there's any other features in here. I think that's all of them. And I'm going to go back to, I looked at Fred to change the PowerPoint, but then I realized he's not doing it anymore.
You took that job away from him.
Yeah. So, like I said, looks like only half are asleep. That's good. That's the end of the presentation. Any questions? Dave doesn't have a question? Unbelievable. Yes.
Follow one or the other if there's some kind of design
So the question was, with a difference between the legal and the wiki version, which one should be followed? So what I would say is that the wiki version will be nice to be able to search, and there will be something that shows what changes have been made since the published or legal version has been there. So I don't anticipate there's going to be a lot of changes, and so it should be real easy to see any changes that have been made. So I would say the electronic version is going to be the easiest one to use. You just need to be careful and make sure that nothing's been changed since the published version. Exactly, in that particular topic.
For heart radius, the degree of curvature, and the latest change only has a bridge change to it. Go ahead and use the wiki.
Any other questions? Yep, Brandon? So Brandon's comment was that he hopes that there will also be a Word or a PDF version that's going along, and actually that's what the legal version will be. So that will be one that's available, and we'll have a link to that so that you can just go and open it right up and see. And in essence, what it's going to be is exactly what's on there, except any changes that have been made. Those would be updated when, like I said, semi-annually or annually. Any other questions? Dave? Uh-huh. Yeah, there's going to be a disclaimer that says that the electronic version is a courtesy copy. So the legal version will be the printed copy. And again, that's at least initially. I really don't anticipate a lot of changes that are going to make a difference because we haven't had those changes now. This version that's out has not had a change for 4 years. And I know that we have changes in the way we do business. So I think that this is going to be probably a lot better functionality, even though it may be outdated from the legal version. And we'll also have a list of things that have changed. So I think to get to your point, when you go to court, the printed or legal version is going to be the one that's going to govern in court. Chris? Right. So, yeah, Chris made a good point. He said basically that these are guidelines. And so there actually is a legal ramification, but the real legal ramification is the stamp. The person who's doing the design stamps it and says that they've done it to standards. The guideline is kind of, like you said, it's something that's just out there that's saying, here's how you ought to go about doing it. It's like the design exception process. When something comes up that's not being built to standard, there's an exception process, and that has to be signed. So I agree. I think getting hung up on which one's the legal is probably not going to be that big a deal. And even more so than that, there's just not a lot of stuff in the guideline that's going to change drastically enough that it's going to affect a legal type issue. Any other questions? Tracy, you don't have any questions? Aren't you designing projects? Yes. In fact, it's going to be the first of the year at the latest. So, yeah, we'll send out an announcement that it becomes the 2016 Manual of Instruction. Yes. So if you go to the link on if you type in at the search, when you go there and you type in your SharePoint or your, what we call our network, it will go to this, the one that was there, yeah. And then on the feedback, if you type in and say, here's what I think ought to be changed, that'll go to that discipline lead for action. Oh boy, let me see if I can think of who it is. Let me pull this back up so I can look and see. But that's what Fred thinks. Everyone else is like, no, let's get out of here. So he doesn't look nervous. So the program development is Bill Lawrence. Project management is Jim Golden. Roadway design is myself. Environmental is Brandon Weston. Utilities is Richard Manser. Right-of-way, I believe, is James Olszewski. I'm not sure. It might be a combination between him and Lyle McMillan. Hydraulics is Jerry Cheney. Materials is Scott Andrus. Structures is Carmen Swanwick. Geotech is Keith Brown, I believe. I think it is Keith. Traffic and safety is John Leonard. Construction is Michelle Page. And maintenance is Kevin Griffin. So it doesn't have that anywhere in here, but whenever you make a comment, that's who it will go to for action on whether or not to make the change. Yeah. Not all of them. Some of them still have some text, like program development. That one still has some text in here because it's stuff that's more direction to the designer of how the program development is done. And it's probably appropriate in that section. Some do, some don't. Most of them now are just pointing to the MOIs, though. Yeah. Chris? So no, actually drainage is probably going to stay under hydraulics.
No, but in a wiki format, we haven't bitten that one off yet. We've talked about it, but we haven't committed yet.
Chris Potter talked about doing local government in the same way too. If this, I think this can work really well if we get to figure out how to make that difference between electronic and a paper copy, so to speak. But I think that the continual updates and the notifications and stuff will be really valuable. So I think this will end up being something really good. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Reminder, make sure you sign the roll, and if you need an out-of-state CPU credit, they're here.
Thanks.
Sorry about that.
What happened?
When I left last night, it was working fine. I came in this morning, it worked, and then it just lost its frequency. So
It just lost its connection.
yeah, he knew the right buttons to